The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Welcome to a discussion with Elinor Lipman. She is the author of Isabel's Bed, and I want to welcome you to the program, Elinor. My name is Cheryl Smith. I'm from the Hennepin County Library. I've read your 4 books and found that they were wonderfully witty and engaging. Could you start off by giving us some personal background, where you grew up, where you live now, and how this personal background affects your writing?
Sure. I was born and raised in Lowell, Massachusetts, and I went to college in Boston, Simmons College, and I lived in Boston till 1985 and moved to the western part of the state, which is only a slight distinction when you're in the Midwest, but it's 2 hours from Boston, and it's Northampton, Mass., which is where the home of Smith College is. And I started writing. I didn't start writing till I was 28, and I had just at that time I was working in Massachusetts at the Mass Teachers Association, and just sort of took a writing course at night as a busman's holiday, a fiction writing workshop with no particular drive to do so. Just a sort of course came through on a brochure and appealed to me. And I took it. I hadn't been someone who had wanted to write her whole life. I had always had a kind of journalism job, worked on house organs, working for various Mass Teachers Association, for public TV, and didn't have a burning desire to write, but just the right course at the right time happened. I signed up for it and then got really bitten by the bug.
That's wonderful. When you write about people, talking about your characters, I sense a special caring about your characters. One interviewer said that you find romance and friendship are still possible in this world, both of them. And so how do you go about thinking up and developing your characters in your writing?
Well, you know, it's funny when she said that, or he, I don't remember who said that, about finding romance possible in this world. Part of it is that I'm, after all, creating another world. I'm making. I think part of the reason I do this is that I'm creating a world, and I'm becoming God of that world. And then I'm certainly going to, you know, I'm not as I've. What I think is if I'm going to populate this world, then I want to give my characters a certain degree of fulfillment and satisfaction, and perhaps you know, I don't want to make their children drown. I'm not that kind of writer, and I think that the kindness might come from the fact that I just, you know, I get to know the characters and I come to love the characters, and they take over. And they have a life of their own. And I'm just sort of chasing after them with a pencil, as I think Faulkner said that. When things are really cooking, then they start resisting me. I have an idea originally. This has happened in all of my novels, where I think that I am setting out to do a particular thing, to achieve a particular, let's say, get 2 people together, or you know, toward a certain end. And then the characters develop a life of their own, and they start resisting me.
They resist. I had read someplace that you said I'm at the beck and call of my characters, and that they help you finish. How do you finish the story? How does the character help you to finish the story then?
Well, this happened in Isabel's Bed. The narrator, Harriet, arrives. She comes from Manhattan, and she's had this, you know, nothing's ever gone right. And she arrives in Truro, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, to take this job as a ghostwriter. And I thought that Harriet would arrive, that the house would be this cold, unwelcoming show place, but of the wrong, you know, sort of a Malibu house on Cape Cod, and it wouldn't match. It didn't match the setting. It didn't match Harriet. And Harriet pulled up to it. I have her drive to the Cape, and she pulls up to the house, and she spots it, and immediately says, I didn't I don't hate it. And then a paragraph later said she loves it. And then things, of course, changed because I thought, this is not the alien environment I thought it was going to be. And then sure enough, she goes inside, and there's Isabel, who I thought was going to be older, crueler, more demanding, and it turns out within a matter of just a very few pages that Isabel needs a friend, and Harriet has been essentially sent by me to fill this role. So then I thought, this isn't what I was setting out to do. And very early on, Isabel sort of flings her arms around Harriet's shoulder and says, that I have them leave the room. I described it as best friends heading out to recess, and I said, and that must have been page 20, and I thought, this is different than what I expected.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I was surprised when, she came in and she did like it, listening or reading about her character earlier in the book. I was surprised at that, and I was surprised all the time with your plot changes, and that's another thing. But it was wonderful being surprised. I mean, I wrote down in my notes here, laughing aloud while reading must be a common trait for your readers, because I do that myself. And how do you develop these plots, these twists and turns in your stories?
Oh, it's funny. I work at it. It doesn't, that's a place where the characters don't help me out that much, that I really, I sort of sit down and think, what's going to happen to Harriet tomorrow? And it's like a puzzle, and I think that these are the 5 balls that I'm juggling in the air, and eventually I'm going to have to sort of gracefully get them down to the ground, and without dropping them. But also, I am trying to sort of satisfy the reader, and I don't want it, when I was writing Isabel's Bed, I sold it when it was about 125 pages into it, and I had to write a page about what would happen in the rest of the book, and of course I had no idea. So I made up a few things that Kenny, the boyfriend who throws her out, who's a bagel baker, would sort of rear his ugly head again, and that bagels would have some kind of role later on in the book, but who knew? And that in a general way, but I said that Harriet, I said I was sort of, even though I might be constitutionally incapable of not marching my characters down the aisle, I really felt that with this book, I wanted Harriet's happy ending to be internal. I wanted to be a sort of victory over haplessness, because she's quite hapless in almost all areas.
And you did mention the bagels. We have a couple bagels here today.
Yes.
They
Yes.
have a real predominant role in your story.
They do. They do. Of course, I can't.
We won't tell what it is.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
All right. And besides bagels, another reviewer, Paul Kafka, I believe, said you are a meticulous observer of civilized ways, from surf casting to hairstyles. And can you tell us how you use your sharp eye for the absurd to give these comic details in your story? How do you study for this?
Well, when you said before about laughing out loud, when I first started writing, the things that people laughed at, and in fact the people that they were laughing at all surprised me. I felt that what I was doing is perhaps making some wry observations at best. That's what I was doing, and I wasn't trying to go for jokes. And and if I ever suspect that I'm reaching to make a joke, then I just stop. I don't want to do that. And I try to eliminate all of those and not make jokes. It's not my job. And but as far as the detail, it's one of those things. It's sort of, I don't know how other people's minds work. I don't know what they see. So it's hard for me to say, this is what I do. I just report what I see. So I don't know what I do or what I'm screening out or what I'm zeroing in on, because it just is what I see. And then it's gratifying and wonderful that people find it funny. But when I first wrote, my first novel was Then She Found Me, and when it was done and sold, I think, and edited, then finally I gave my husband the manuscript to read, because He's not of the touchy-feely critics who talks about how I could perhaps render this different from rendering that. He just, very black and white. So he doesn't get it until it's had outside validation. But I would hear him laugh, and I would find him in the house and say, what exactly is, what line are you laughing at? Because I don't know myself. And I still, when I'm reading now from Isabel's Bed, I know if you're on the road a bit, then you know you've sort of pre-picked the 20 minutes that you want to read from. So I know where the laughs are coming. But when I first read these parts, it actually shocks me what people find funny. There's this one line that always gets this big laugh about Harriet is getting her hair cut, and the hairdresser says something about this brush, this very brush in his hand, this week only, was for sale. And I just, said it. And it always gets the biggest laugh of the 20 minutes. And I still don't quite understand why, that it maybe is a familiar chord, or it I don't know what. People identify, or we've all been through it. So I don't know. I couldn't really sort of say what I do. I was reading Woody Allen's biography by Eric Lax, and he was describing that people say, how do you do that? Or how are you funny? And he said that it's like if someone is an artist and you say, here, quick, sketch a rabbit, and they do it in seconds, that, if I was sketching a rabbit, I couldn't do it if I had all week. And yet the artist would be incapable of saying how he did it. He just does it. And so that, I don't know how good an analogy that is, but it's just, I sort of do what I do, and sometimes I think I'm writing something quite serious. And I will then, the first person to read it, I will hear them saying, this happened when I sent Then She Found Me to my agent, and she's very low-key, and she said, I quite liked it, and I will send it to the editor. And then the editor called me just to say, heard it's on its way, can't wait. Lizzie, my agent, said it was hilarious. And I said, hilarious? I mean, it was just not something I would have, I didn't think that, and it surprised me. It also surprised me that my exceedingly low-key agent would use that word anyway.
Wow. Well, let's talk about your Isabel's Bed, your book, your new book here. Here's Isabel's Bed. This has been called, now let me say these things, a romp, or a naughtiness played for laughter, or a wry, warm story, and so love on the rye here, and those who practice it. How did you think up this particular story? There must be we talk about celebrity crime, perhaps. How did you think of, without giving away the plot, how did you think this went up?
Well, actually, it was sort of a handoff from my agent, in that I had read in the paper that Ivana Trump was going to be writing, quote-unquote writing, 2 novels, and that my publisher, Pocket Books, was looking for a ghostwriter. And they'd be, in fact, paying this person $1 million for a 2-book deal. So and in fact, the headline said in the New York Post, it said, Ivana be a novelist, was the headline to this gossip item. So I immediately called, well, within minutes maybe, I called my agent and said, I'm between books. I had finished The Way Men Act and was looking for something else. And I have a wonderful relationship with Pocket, and I meet deadlines. And maybe, who knows, maybe they think it was a good idea. So she said, well, it's not the worst idea I ever heard, but I mean, she had a few reasons. They were looking for a Vanity Fair kind of writer, she thought, and that someone had to be sort of free and available and could jump on the Concorde and, party with Ivana. And and she said, besides, I don't think you have the right clothes. So she came back, and they had in fact said very diplomatically that, of course we're looking, we'd rather have her novel, and she has a distinctive voice, and it's not Ivana's. And but then, just as an aside, my agent said, the only thing is, I would have loved to have read the novel you would write after ghostwriting with Ivana Trump. So I said, bingo, that I think I will do a book about a sort of lower key, unglamorous writer doing something for the likes of and Ivana Trump has nothing to do with it. But I had another thing. I heard of another thing that happened that actually made me think of Isabel, and that was a friend of mine took her son for an interview to a prep school. And she was waiting in the waiting room along with Alexandra Isles, who was Klaus von Bülow's, soap opera mistress, Dark Shadow. She testified in his trial. And the admission staff was just dancing attention on her. And they were saying, could we get you coffee? We'll be right with you. So sorry for the wait. Is everything okay? And ignoring everyone else. And when my friend told me this, I was fascinated that someone whose credentials were essentially having slept with a defendant in a murder trial would accord her all this respect and attention. And so I thought that I didn't know what Isabel would do, but that she would, her claim to fame would be that she was in the wrong bed at the wrong time.
Well, it's a wonderful book. I just really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it. Right now, I was wondering if you could just read a little bit from Isabel's Bed, as long as we're talking about that. Some things that you found especially funny.
Well, I'll read from Isabel. Harriet is a hapless writer, and she's addicted to her writing workshop. And this is just a short few passages of Harriet at her writer's workshop. I couldn't go home to my parents' house because I was secretly writing about them. After years of crafting stories about love between quiet people, the kind of love that small English movies celebrated, I had written a high-concept story about how my parents married each other twice. The night I read it, my classmates applauded. One person said, "Brava." Someone else said she could see Eli Wallach playing the father. "So what do we do with it?" asked our workshop leader. "Send it out?" I asked. "Eventually. Read me the last sentence again." I did, fingering the beads around my neck the way I'd seen women authors at readings do. I read, "Arthur set down the tray gently so the apple-scented tea wouldn't overwhelm its vessel, and with ineffable sadness departed Charlotte's lightless room." It's supposed to be terrible. I didn't look up, but heard the purrs of approval from the backs of the other writers' throats. "Can you see it?" our leader asked, in italics, a prologue, and then we turned the page to chapter 1. He had mimed this with a graceful turn of his wrist, and flashed back to the parents as youngsters. How about that? I heard more approving murmurs all around me. I couldn't imagine writing one page past these 6 about my parents. Couldn't imagine why people like them liked them more than Cecily Biggins or Maisie Trumbull or Emma Liversidge of my Shopkeeper trilogy. But what a night. I jotted their comments in my margins for later savoring. "Has your usual clarity and optimism. Best thing you've done. The dishwasher scene is great. And this, unless I was dreaming, shimmers with potential."
Good. Yeah, I especially liked a couple times one time when you were talking about Hemingway, and you described Hemingway as that the father of that actress.
Well, that's Isabel. Isabel is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I mean, she means well. She's a big heart, but she's trying to think of Hemingway's name, and she said, "You know,
the
that
father,
the father of that actress, grandfather."
Yeah. Right now, you've another book that you've written, "The Way Men Act," and then another one, "Then She Found Me." In both of these books, talking a little bit more seriously, you get to the mother-daughter relationship. In The Way Men Act, it was just a little bit, I think, but of course, Then She Found Me was mostly about the mother-daughter relationship. But can you give us some background about your writing about this relationship?
Yeah, I'm a little curious about it myself, actually, why I keep bringing up the mother. There's no mother, there's not much mother to speak of in Isabel's Bed. Right. I think I should take this up on a psychoanalytic couch. But, I don't know exactly. In my family, I had a very strong, my father was the sort of, he wasn't a writer, but he was. They were both serious readers. But my father was the one that I would sort of tell the stories to, and he would always be the one I would try to sort of, get him to laugh at my jokes. And my mother was sort of a quieter presence, and though very close emotionally. So I'm not sure exactly. Am I trying to sort of reverse the way things were, where my father was sort of the I don't know, the role model of sorts. I don't know. I don't know why I'm doing this. I think the mother-daughter relationship in the way men act, where they're quietly sort of living together and they're essentially roommates, is a little bit closer to my mother. She has my mother's condiment phobia in the way men act. My mother has a condiment phobia.
A condiment phobia.
A condiment phobia, and so does Melinda's mother.
I see.
So that's actually taken from whole cloth.
Oh,
But my mother didn't mind at all.
Well, she must be the opposite of the one, and then she found me.
Yes, she is quite the opposite. She's allowed Then She Found Me, loud, obnoxious TV talk show hostess, and birth mother to April, who doesn't particularly want to be found.
Right, I loved it. Another reviewer, Laura Matthews, I believe, compared you to Jane Austen when you persuade us about the uncoolness of misreading a person's affection. And Michael Doris called you a witty, compassionate chronicler of modern sensibility. So how do you maintain this sense of reality under all the glib talk on the top? Is that an adequate question?
You mean in terms of in the books? Well, I think it's because, as I, part of it is that I think I'm telling this story pretty straightforwardly, and that there's this peculiar layer of what other people find funny that I'm not planning for. I'm not sort of building that in. It's more like I'm telling the story, I think, in a straightforward manner.
Right.
So again, it's because I only live inside my own head that I don't know how other writers think or what they are getting down on the page compared to what they're living or what they're seeing. But I mean, I have a sort of a very normal existence of, sort of get up in the morning, drive my son to school, and, throughout the day be thinking of what I'm making for dinner. So I don't know if that is non-responsive, but...
No, I just thought it was wonderful to be compared to Jane Austen, too.
Although I have, you pretty much... if you do any sort of comedy of manners, you pretty much, you're a woman, it's said in a flattering way. Jane Austen pretty much pops up.
Okay.
Yeah, which I love it, of course. And when I got that review, I wrote to Laura and said, I do believe you will be on every book jacket from now until I die. Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have a collection of short stories called In Love and Out Again.
Into Love and Out Again.
Into Love and Out Again. Sorry.
It's the first line of a Dorothy Parker poem.
Oh, great. Well,
yeah.
I should have known that. And it's been called a roller coaster of romantic encounters. And you've also written many short stories for magazines. You did that before?
I did actually. Most of the stories that appeared in magazines are in the collection. I had published a few, and then wrote. My agent took me on after I had a couple of stories published, and not in grand places. I had 2 stories in Yankee Magazine and 1 story in Ascent, which is the University of Illinois. And my agent took me on in a great act of faith, and just said, keep writing, and when you get about 14 stories, I'd like to show them, I'd like to send them out. And she hand-selected an editor at Viking who she felt would like them, and just we had same sensibilities, and she saw them first and she bought them after asking me to write more stories about Tim and Hannah. Hannah, of course, is from Edina, Minnesota. You must know that.
I do know that.
Yes, local hero.
I was hoping I wasn't like her mother.
No, but in fact, Stacy bought these stories just on the promise that I would write 4 more about Tim and Hannah, and it was a great act of faith. And my new Isabel's Bed is dedicated to Stacy. I followed her from Viking to Pocket, and she read every chapter of Isabel as it was being written.
Oh, wow. With Tim and Hannah, now, could you just tell the beginning of it? I mean, it's how they met.
They met in line, or as they say in New York, online, at the Registry of Motor Vehicles. And Hannah is 9 months pregnant, and they strike up a conversation, and he realizes that she is single and he takes it from there.
Yeah, I thought it was a wonderful series.
Thank you.
Now, you also write reviews for the New York Times book review?
I do.
How did you get started doing this?
They just called after my second book. After Then She Found Me was reviewed in the Times. I think there's maybe 2 with sort of the rite of passage or something.
Oh, 2.
And they called and asked me to review Carrie Fisher's, at that time, new novel, which was Surrender the Pink. She's now had at least one more after that. So they call pretty regularly.
Well, yeah, I know I've got some of the titles here. One was Making Winnipeg Safe for Mermaids, and another Kiss Me Deadly, and Jack Mrs. Nina's Fish Sticks.
Right. Well, those are just they stick those on.
They
there.
stick those on.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just
no,
was
those
thinking,
books. In fact, I have a wonderful. Carl Ackerman wrote The Patron Saint of Unmarried Women, and I reviewed that book in May of '94.
Okay.
And I loved the book, and I reviewed it all positively, and it made it onto page 6. And a short time after that, and then we talked after it appeared, and we sort of struck up a long distance friendship. And then shortly after that, they notified me that they were having a baby and a girl, and they were naming her after me.
Oh, wow.
So that was about as fruitful as an assignment as you can get.
Well, I don't have much else. Do you have any other things that you want to talk about any of your writing styles or anything, or about bagels or anything like that?
Not really. I
Okay,
just no. One thing that came to mind very quickly, we were talking before about the characters having a mind of their own, and probably the most dramatic example was in The Way Men Act, when I couldn't get 2 characters together. I thought I was sort of fixing them up. And the narrator one morning, as I sat down to write, the other 2 characters were Dennis and Libby, and the narrator said to me, and I wrote it down, not that I was channeling or anything, but she said, I think I should explain, for the sake of clarification, that Dennis and I slept together before Libby moved back to town. And I hadn't understood why, what was holding this up, and what was really going on. And then I realized that changed the course of the book, because I realized that Melinda was an unreliable narrator, and that it wasn't what it appeared to be. And this book was really about Melinda and Dennis getting together.
So she came up with some surprises along the way, Melinda did?
Yeah.
I thought so. I, of course, especially like Dwight the librarian in one of your stories.
Yes.
Yes, it was very good. Well, all of your characters are just fantastic and just really fun for us. We've had some librarian meetings where we've had people talk about books, and I want you to know that 2 of your books have been chosen for these meetings as the person's favorite book of the year. So we've been really happy to have that for you. And we certainly enjoy all that you've written and wish you luck in the future writing that you have. And we wish to thank you for all the insight and the chuckles that you bring into our lives. So thank you very much for coming,
you're very
Elinor.
welcome.
And thank you for coming to a discussion with Elinor Lipman.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.